conserved areas have had any form of assessment to understand whether they're being effective. Well, conservation is a complex issue. And as we heard from Elizabeth Marema and Wanjira Matai this week, we have to do a better job of including Indigenous voices in the conversation. Engaging communities in decision-making is critical to success. We need to make transformative change in how we go about conservation business. And at the same time, the field of conservation is changing. And what we used to call conservation biology has now evolved into a multidisciplinary science. And in order to move forward, we need to recognize this disciplinary diversity, and we need to embrace it in a way so that we can address the conservation challenges that I've just described. Now, we also need to embrace the diversity of the membership within our society across 6 regions, chapters, global programs, working groups, and task forces. We need to empower our members and support them to work towards addressing the challenges that I've described. So how can SCB stay relevant, and how can we have impact? Well, here's some of the things that we need to do. We need to create a global collaborative network and a new business model to support members and to facilitate the sharing of knowledge. We need to improve equity and inclusion in science and conservation practice. We need more women, more minorities, and LGBTQIA+. We also need to allow for pathways for members to have a voice and be more involved in decision-making. We need greater engagement with the social sciences and other disciplines to facilitate more robust and effective conservation. And we need to make SCB a more welcoming place as a professional home. We also want to collaborate with other organizations that share our mission and our vision. And this is a really nice mural, comes from Current Conservation, which I thought I'd share with you. This is in the latest issue of Current Conservation, and please have a look at this. So working together towards a shared vision for the future and engaging in collaborations with other organizations that share this vision is really our path to future success. So in the next talk by Jeff and Warren, we're going to learn how SCB is planning to reorganize to be in a position to deliver the needed change and to support and empower our members at the same time. So thank you. With that, I'm going to hand over to Jeff and Warren.
All right, so I'll move your slides for you, Jeff and Warren. You just have to cue me. Okay. Okay, Warren, do you want to make a start?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes.
So I'd just like to introduce Warren, who's our Managing Director, and Jeff Su, who is our partner from NRhythm, and they're going to present the Vision 2026 SCB reorganization presentation. Over to you.
Great, thanks for that, Tony. I appreciate it. So SCB began a reorganization process. Oh, go to the next slide, if you don't mind. We began our reorganization process in 2020. So I'll summarize some highlights of this process. One, we began with 2-hour design sessions, or 2 8-hour design sessions with the design team. They composed of a mix of board and staff. Then we moved on to an organizational health assessment using NRhythm's OHI report. So it's their organizational health index to assess the collective view of the health and operations of SCB. We had interviews with key SCB stakeholders, and all of this was gathered and analyzed by NRhythm, culminating with a recommendation for a model, which was approved by the SCB BOG. Next slide, please. From those 2020 design sessions, we articulated a shared purpose. You can see it over here on the left-hand screen. We exist to advance science, policy, and practice in a way that encourages collaboration, community, and knowledge exchange so that a diverse and united voice creates positive change for biodiversity conservation. And we use this to help us stay centered and focused for the transition to come. Next slide, please. There are many motivating factors behind the need for reorganization, and Tony in his introduction touched on many of them. So we have climate change, biodiversity loss, decolonizing conservation. We have racial and social equity, and the relevance of science to all keep in mind. Next slide, please. A second theme motivation for our transition is the state of operations and governance of SCB. The transition transforms SCB from a hub and spoke governance to a more equitable, decentralized global network. And this new global business model creates resources for sections, EID, and programs. So that's a main part of the vision here. Next slide, please. We also believe that we have designed a governance model that will empower sections, working groups, and chapters and members, align formal and informal powers, reduce bureaucracy, and support traditional underrepresented disciplines within conservation science. Next slide, please. Now, for this past year, for 2021, the Transition Implementation Group has been meeting bi-weekly since January to begin implementation of 17 work priorities. And this has been detailed over a 6-year business plan and a new global governance structure, which Jeff momentarily will get into. All of which are central to the realization of Vision 2026, which, as you see here in the last bullet, was approved by the BOG at the September board meeting. Thanks, Justine. So Vision 2026, again, to help us with this idea of moving from the hub and spoke to this decentralized global network, we vision that all sections to be resourced enough to hire between 1 to 1.5 full-time employees to support section activity, their own membership, and local chapters. Also, working groups, global programs, and task force are, we vision that they will be charting the programmatic direction and definition of SCB and have decision-making power at the global board level and with dedicated funding. We recognize the importance of EID in operationalizing it into decision-making and with dedicated funding. And finally, here on this slide, equitable pathways to access to leadership roles that are explicit and resourced. Next slide, please. And with all of this, we see the potential to grow a movement for more than 10,000 members. And this is a new associate member type, which we'll get communication on here as the transition continues in the future. And all 10,000 members of those that are considering SCB to be the home for their conservation projects and careers. We're also exploring new opportunities for new services and programming to support this worldwide movement in addition to in addition to our traditional conferences like ICCB and journals. And reorganizing formally what was the executive office into global services and redirect and empower section staff, facilitate global network function health, and manage global systems. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Jeff.
Great, thank you, Warren. And I'll go ahead and advance all the animations, or else it'll be too hard to.
Okay, on it.
Thank you. And while you're doing that, I just want to say very briefly that my career started as a conservation biologist. I'm a member of SCB. So I am one of you, and it's been an absolute honor to be supporting the society this last 2 years and into the future. And also, this is one of these moments where so much collective work and effort and thinking and wisdom and energy and sweat equity has been put into, and it's going to be represented here in this two-dimensional flat diagram here. And just want to commend really everyone who is on this call that has worked on this, the board, the TIG, and really in the context of a lot of the work we do, we work with a lot of global networks. And I can honestly say that SCB has had one of the boldest visions of how to transform the network to truly embrace some really complex issues like global equity and the history and decolonizing conservation in a very honest and authentic way. And so this is the culmination of a lot of that work. And as I've said to everyone close on the board and the TIG, the structure is the beginning, of course, and we want to describe the structure to you, but how we live into this structure is a collective choice moving on from here, and we'll be continuing to support that. So as Warren mentioned, the large colored circles here represent the 4 major components of the governance structure. And different than currently, have you first focus on the purple circle, the regional council, and the programmatic council. So rather than a single global board, the idea was to really lift up and recognize the importance of both regional governance and regional decisions, as well as programmatic decisions such as branding, storytelling, identity, journal choice, disciplinary inclusion, the changing narrative of conservation biology to conservation science, as Tony mentioned. And so we're creating 2 governance bodies, both with intersections in between them, also with both empowered to make independent decisions, as well as come together to make connected decisions. Where those 2 councils come together is the Global Network Board. So it's made up of an equal representation of the Regional Council and the Programmatic Council, as well as the officers of the society. That is the legal board of the society in terms of entity status, in terms of in the legal world. And then supporting this whole structure is Warren and the Global Services staff. And so they are changing their roles from sort of thinking themselves as a central office to thinking of themselves as network leaders empowering this global network. Within all of this is a vision of each section becoming stronger and empowered to be able to manage membership and services for members in their section in a way that is unique and supported, and recognizing the differences between the different sections and the different regions of the world. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so very quickly, this is just the structure of the Global Network Board. It includes the 5 official officers of President, President-elect, Treasurer, and Secretary, and a specific EID officer. Then the equal representation from the 2 councils, there's 3 regional council members that will be rotating and 3 programmatic councils that will also be rotating. I'll take the chance here to say this is a structure that is still being built and still in progress. So the regional council members and the program council members have been meeting for the last 3 months, will continue to meet. The final governance is to be self-designed and self-organized within these groups. And if anyone's interested in becoming part of that, speak with Global Services or speak with Tony. And then there's also a representative of Global Services on the Global Network Board, representing the needs of that network leadership and the staff. Next slide, please. So there is a very, very detailed business model that connected to this governance model. And we're calling this Vision 2026 because we are stepping our way from now until 2026. And this represents a business model that's self-sustaining. It does not depend on external funding. So any external fundraising would be on top of this. But it is really living into and operationalizing this idea that there is not a central office that's making all the financial decisions, but it's truly a collaborative effort, and revenue is shared between all the sections. So the splits that you see represent the split between, the first number is the percentage of revenue from that source. that goes to support the global infrastructure administered by global services. The second number is the amount of that revenue that is distributed equally to all 6 sections, as well as a specific fund to support programs and a specific fund to support equity, inclusion, diversity, and justice efforts. So you'll see there between membership journals and new services, those are the revenue splits. At a very high level, from a staffing perspective, we are planning on this being able to support 1 to 1.5 full-time employees within each section, and within the EID fund, if that's the structure that chooses to arise, as well as maintaining the current level of global services staff, which is currently at 5 full-time employees. Next slide, please. So the growth assumptions to achieve this business model is the creation of a free membership. So this is a membership level that will embrace currently, a great example would be all the students and student sections and chapters, all volunteers who are working on the ground conservation efforts that have chosen to put their volunteer effort under the moniker of SCB. So we want to grow a movement of anyone wanting to be part of SCB and see that as their growing professional home will become a member and have certain services. The 10,000 number is not arbitrary. That is based upon the number of subscribers that we once had for Conservation Magazine. We see that as a little bit of an allegory, people who want to be engaged at that level. The business model then assumes a certain conversion rate from that free membership. As those members grow, their careers grow, their connections grow, they eventually will be choose to pay for a membership that includes certain services like access to journals, like discounts for conferences, as well as a broader idea of membership services than just one that fits sort of the traditional academic member. We want that to be more broadly appealing to conservation practitioners of all kinds. The new services are still to be designed. This will be trainings, webinars, different types of online as well as in-person services that could be created at really all levels of the society, at the global level, within sections, at chapters, and will become another revenue source to be shared through the collaborative revenue sharing model. Next slide, please. Great. So thank you all and for listening to our presentation.
Okay, so next up, we've got Jennifer to present the finance report. And after this, there will be a slot for questions, unless you want to have some questions now. Tony?
Maybe we can have a couple of minutes for questions if people have thoughts or ideas that they'd like to share with us, or you'd like to have some more information.
Okay.
So let's open for questions for 2 to 3 minutes. So what do people think about this new model?
No, if you don't want to eat, just go get ready.
All right. So, okay. Would anyone like
Volker?
to ask a question, Volker? All right.
My name is Volker. I'm a member, and I find this really interesting and forward-looking. I have just a question: if the people who are paid members, those are usually or often people at universities which have already the access to the journals through their universities, through their organizations, yeah. And so my question is, what can we offer those future associate members? For them, those are usually people who have not this access except their students at well-established universities, yeah. Would that not be most interesting for them to have this access to journals, particularly if those are people, associate members in the Global South? Thank you.
Maybe I could jump in there, Adina, and thanks, Volker. I often take a kind of a different perspective on membership, especially paid membership. First, I want to say we moved to a sliding scale in SCB, so we do try to have equitable fee levels. We've tried different models, so That point being that not everybody pays the same amount, and we try to accommodate what people can pay so that it's still within their ability to support the society. And I know that we generally think like we're paying for something, so what do we get from it? But I think we also need to think about the society as something that we want to support. So it's also our way of saying, hey, I care about the society, and this is my small contribution to make sure that it persists for others and into the future. So that's kind of more my perspective on paying members. They're people who really are central to the organization, central to the practice, and they gain from the network. They gain from the journals. Even if you have sort of access to the journal, you might be feeling that it's an important journal, that you want to offer it some support, that the conferences are important to happen, and you want to make sure there's resources there so that they actually happen. So yeah, I see paying members as dedicated to the success of the society and willing to contribute to it because it has larger benefits to them and to society and the field as a whole.
And I can add very quickly. Thank you, Adina, and great opportunity, Adina, when you've just spoken to. Also, thank you personally for all the efforts you have put into this vision. From the associate member side, Volker, I would say that it's an opportunity to not connect. I think the main reason why we want to join a professional society is to network and to connect on the level of our work. And so associate members will have the opportunity. We're still designing exactly what the splits will be, but the visions that the board and TIG has been talking about is that associate members have opportunities to participate in working groups, have opportunities to participate in regional conferences, or have all kinds of ways to network and be part of a professional society without the sort of ceiling of payment. But in many ways, it's also, we're hearing a lot of comments I also see here, is that I think for membership to stay strong moving forward, it needs to be more than access to journals, is what most comments are saying, because of the changing nature of the business model of journals, because of academia, because of many different things, and the number of members of the society who are not academics. And so a different type of membership and identity and set of services is needed, and I think there's lots of room for creativity.
Okay, shall we move ahead now? We can always take more questions later, and we should call on Jennifer to take over for the next bit.